Did Jesus just cancel the entire Old Testament in one sentence? Or did everyone completely misread what he said? Because a lot of people think Matthew 5:10-17 is where Jesus throws out the law of Moses and starts fresh. Other people think it means every single Old Testament rule still applies exactly as written. Sacrifices, dietary laws, all of it. Both of those readings are wrong. By the end of this video, you are going to know exactly what Jesus meant by the word fulfill, and honestly, once you see it, you will wonder how anyone missed it. Let's set the scene first, because context changes everything here. We are in the book of Matthew, chapter 5. This is the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, which is basically Jesus' opening keynote address. It is the first big teaching moment in his public ministry, delivered on a hillside to crowds who had followed him out of the towns around Galilee. Matthew's gospel was written by, well, Matthew, a former tax collector turned disciple, and most scholars place it a few decades after Jesus' death and resurrection, likely written for a Jewish Christian community trying to work out how their new faith in Jesus fit with everything they had always believed about the law of Moses. That detail matters more than people realize. His readers grew up on the law of Moses. They knew the 10 Commandments, the food laws, the sacrifices, all of it. It shaped their entire identity as a people. So when Jesus starts teaching with this kind of authority, correcting long-held assumptions and speaking as if he has the final word, the obvious question in their minds is simple. Is this guy replacing our entire religious system? Is everything we were taught about to become irrelevant? Matthew knows that question is coming, so he includes Jesus answering it directly, right at the start, before any confusion can build. Here is the verse itself. Matthew 5:17 says, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill." Read that slowly, because Jesus is doing something specific. He is naming the exact rumor he wants to shut down. The law and the prophets were shorthand for the entire Hebrew Bible, what we now call the Old Testament. So Jesus is not being vague here. He is saying, I know what you're thinking, and you're wrong. I have not come to tear this down. Then comes the word that trips everyone up: fulfill. In everyday English, fulfill sounds like finishing a task, so you can put it away. You fulfill a promise, then you're done with it. But that is not how the original word works here. The Greek word is pleimros, and it means to fill something up completely, to bring it to its full and intended meaning. Think of it like this. If someone hands you a half-filled glass of water and says, fill it up, you don't destroy the glass. You complete what it was always meant to hold. That is what Jesus is claiming to do with the law. Not erase it, complete it. Bring out everything it was always pointing toward. Now let's keep reading, because Jesus does not stop at verse 17. He doubles down immediately. Verse 18 says, "For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled." A jot is the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. A tittle is basically a tiny penstroke, smaller than a serif on a letter today. Jesus is saying that not even the smallest, most forgettable detail of the law is getting thrown out. That is about as strong a statement of respect for the Old Testament as you could possibly make. This is not the language of someone abolishing a system. This is the language of someone taking it extremely seriously. Then, in verses 19 and 20, Jesus connects this straight to real life. He says that whoever breaks the smallest commandment and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven, but whoever keeps and teaches them will be called great. And then he adds something that must have landed like a punch to the room. He says that unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven at all. That is huge, because the scribes and Pharisees were the most publicly religious, rule-following people in that entire society. Jesus is not lowering the bar, he is raising it. Whatever people expected him to say about the law, loosening it was definitely not on the table. So here is where the two sections connect. Verse 17 tells us Jesus is not destroying the law, he is completing it. Verses 18 through 20 tell us what that completion actually demands: a deeper obedience, not a smaller one. Put those together and you get a very different picture than either extreme people usually land on. Let's talk about what fulfilling the law actually looks like in practice, because this is where it gets interesting. Right after this passage, Jesus gives a series of teachings that all followed the same pattern. You have heard it said, But I say to you, he takes commandments people already knew, like do not murder, and pushes past the surface behavior into the heart behind it, saying that even unresolved anger carries real moral weight. He does the same with adultery, pointing to the lust behind the act, not just the act itself. Notice what he is doing. He is not canceling, do not murder or do not commit adultery. He's filling those commands up with their full meaning, showing that they were never just about outward behavior in the first place. They were always aimed at the heart. Jesus is pulling that original intention into full view. Here's a simple way to picture this for daily life today. Imagine a music teacher who gives a student sheet music with just the basic melody written out. The student plays the notes correctly but flatly, missing all the dynamics, the emotion, the phrasing the composer intended. Then a master musician comes in and says, "I'm not changing your sheet music. I'm showing you what it was always supposed to sound like." That is fulfillment. Same notes, same law, but played the way it was always meant to be played from the inside out. Think about how this plays out in an ordinary week. Someone can technically avoid stealing, avoid lying outright, avoid every obvious violation on the list, and still walk around resentful, cutting corners, quietly justifying small dishonesties because nothing on the list technically got broken. Jesus is saying that was never the finish line. The command against theft was always meant to shape a person who respects what belongs to others, not just someone who avoids getting caught. That is what filling up the law looks like when it moves from a sermon into a Tuesday afternoon. It is less about a checklist and more about the kind of person the checklist was always trying to produce. Now let's tackle the two questions people always ask about this passage. First one, if Jesus said not one jot or tittle would pass away, why don't Christians follow every Old Testament law today? Things like dietary restrictions or ceremonial sacrifices. The honest answer is that Christian traditions have wrestled with this for 2,000 years, and there are real differences between denominations on exactly how Old Testament law applies now. But the mainstream reading, going back to the rest of the New Testament, is that certain parts of the law, especially the ceremonial and sacrificial system, pointed forward to something, and that something was Jesus himself. Once reality arrives, the pointer has done its job. Fulfilled does not always mean identical repetition. Sometimes it means the thing being pointed to has finally shown up. Second question people ask, doesn't Jesus contradict the Old Testament in places, especially in those you have heard it said statements? Not really, and here's why. He is not overturning the command. He is exposing its full depth. Do not murder was never only about the final violent act. Jesus is showing that the command always had a deeper layer, and he is bringing that layer into the light. That is completion, not contradiction. It helps to notice he never says, "The law told you this, but now I'm telling you the opposite." He always says the law told you this, and here's what it was always aiming at underneath. That phrasing alone should settle the contradiction question for most careful readers. One more small thing worth mentioning here, because it comes up in comments sections constantly. People sometimes assume this passage means Jesus is only talking to Jewish believers and has nothing to say to anyone else. That is not really the point either. Jesus is addressing a specific rumor about his relationship to the law. But the pattern he reveals, obedience that starts in the heart rather than stopping at outward behavior, is presented as the standard for everyone who follows him afterward, not a side note for one audience. So let's bring this all the way back to where we started. The question was whether Jesus abolished the law. He didn't. He said so directly, then backed it up by treating even the smallest details of the law with total seriousness, and then he raised the bar on obedience rather than lowering it. Fulfill means completion, not cancellation. Jesus is the one who brings the law's original purpose into full focus, showing what it was pointing to all along. Here's a thought to sit with before next time. If Jesus took the smallest command that seriously, what does that say about how we should read the parts of Scripture we're tempted to skip past? Go read Matthew chapter 5 for yourself this week, all of it, before the next video. Then drop a comment and tell me, what is one command you always thought was just about outward behavior, but might actually be pointing at something deeper in the heart? If this kind of plain walkthrough helped a passage click for you, subscribe because next week we're unpacking the very next teaching Jesus gives, and it might be the most misunderstood verse in the whole sermon.